So in my past, I struggled with several different addictions, none of which I was really ready to come to terms with. And the reason for it was largely due to comparison. It had a lot to do with the fact that I grew up around and knew people who I would consider to be real addicts, people who were addicted to substances that were truly destructive or destructive in a way that was much more outwardly visible. And so it comes back to that same kind of mentality of I shouldn't have been comparing my insides to others' outsides. Sometime I'm going to need to find where that quote came from. Don't compare your insides to others' outsides, because it's not the same. Everyone lives different lives, and I was living a different life than them, and my struggles were not their struggles. And so by comparing myself to them, I diminished my own issues to such an extent that I lived with my addictions for a lot longer than was necessary. And it hurt me and it tore me up inside. So the first of which was a financial addiction, addicted to spending money that I didn't have, spending the money I did have on things that I didn't need. That was in the form of, getting on Wish and buying a bunch of things to have them show up all the time, because I really loved that feeling of buying something and of receiving something. There was always a really great feeling of tracking the progress of a package as it shipped through. And there was a time in my life when I had like a package showing up every single day, and I really just enjoyed that feeling. And this was during the same time when I was the most depressed. This was during the same time when I wanted to not exist anymore. And so maybe I was, looking for something to kind of fill a void. I'm not entirely sure, but I just really enjoyed that feeling, even though it was putting a financial strain on me that was kind of exacerbating a larger issue, because there were a lot of times when I had bills that were overdue, bills that had gone into collections even, and then I would still overspend in other areas. And it was just this really bad habit. And I thought it was just this thing where I kind of had a little bit of a problem, because I just didn't know how to handle my money, because I just hadn't really been shown a good example of handling my money. Nobody in my family was really good with money that I remember growing up. And I wouldn't say I grew up poor, but we didn't really grow up well off. And so I just remember growing up with that feeling of wanting. And so when I kind of got to an age where I was working and making money, I kind of also had that sort of sense of entitlement of like, this is my money, I can spend it the way that I want to, even though it was to my own detriment, and not just my detriment, but also the partner I was with at the time, who's now my ex. But that extended further than just my own money. I also got credit lines that I drove up. So it wasn't just an entitlement of like, I'm going to spend my own money the way that I want. I was also spending money that wasn't mine the way that I wanted. So it was just really foolish. And there's probably a lot more that goes into it, but that's also during a time in my life where I have a really hard time recollecting a lot of stuff, because maybe to defend my own brain, it's kind of blocked it all out. So a lot of it's kind of spotty, but it kind of leads into my second addiction, which was hoarding. I'm a hoarder. I've always had a hard time getting rid of stuff. I always called myself like a pack rat or a collector. All of the other little terms that hoarders use to justify what they've got. And it's a condition that kind of was passed down to me, but I don't really want to try to blame it on somebody else. It's just it's an issue that I've dealt with since I was younger, since I was a child. I didn't like to get rid of my toys from when I was even younger. As I got older, I didn't want to get rid of my younger version's toys. And I've just always had a really hard time getting rid of things. And I don't know if it ties into that same feeling of just want growing up. And I'm not saying that my parents didn't give me things that I needed, but I had a feeling of like wanting things and not having them. And so the problem kind of escalated and snowballed over time to the point where by the time that my ex and I were in our own apartment, it was essentially kind of hoarded. We even watched the show Hoarders, which was kind of ridiculous. And I would justify, and this was part of the comparison, I would say, oh, I'm not as bad as them. You know, my house doesn't look as bad as theirs. I don't have as much stuff. My stacks are not as high. I can get around my place without having to go through a little tunnel. And so when I say that I'm a hoarder, if I were to find pictures from back then, it might not necessarily look as bad as somebody who ended up on the show Hoarders, but they're kind of like the extreme example. And so in a way, that show kind of became my worst enemy by being that really bad comparison of like, well, if they're the baseline, then I'm fine. And I wasn't fine. My ex and I were not fine. We always lived in a dirty place. We always lived in just so much stuff. All of our stuff was always in boxes. This was partly because of just moving a lot, but because we just never got into a habit of going through our things and getting rid of stuff that we didn't need and putting things away and giving things homes. Nothing ever had a home. And most of it wasn't like, I wasn't like trying to keep like straight up trash. A lot of it ended up being trash because I threw it all away, but I just had a hard time just getting rid of stuff. And the other problem is that it came from a perspective of like everything that I own, everything that I do own and did own back then has like a special meaning to me. I'm one of those people that gives special meaning to objects. Every single object that I own, everything that's in the background of here, I could spend countless hours just detailing every single little item that I have and what it means to me, where I got it, the story that's involved, who gave it to me or where I got it from and why it means something to me and the story behind it. And all of the stuff that I had hoarded also kind of had that same story, whether it was something meaningful or a project that I was going to get to. And that was another big issue, was that a lot of it was projects that I wanted to get to, and I just never had time. And one of my big regrets from that time is that my dog Heimdall lived with us, and I feel really bad about the fact that he had to live in that situation. And I don't have as many pictures of him as I'd like, because so many of the pictures that I took during that time had to be outdoors, because the indoor pictures had to be either cropped in a specific way or framed in a specific way, because I was so embarrassed by the way that my living condition was that I just, for the most part, wouldn't take pictures. And so there's just so few pictures comparatively of Heimdall, my first dog, to the dogs that I have now, or compared to how much I would want to have taken pictures of him, that it really hurts to think about. And it's because I was embarrassed by my situation. And there's also kind of a little story that goes with that. My older brother, one time, he stopped by our apartment, and I think he was dropping off something for me. And I went downstairs to meet him because I didn't want him to come up to the door. And he was like, "Hey, I need to use the restroom." And I was like, "Sorry, you can't." He's like, he didn't even like say anything, basically like, "What does that mean?" And he just kind of blew past me. And I just kind of had that anxiety pit in my stomach and chest of like, oh my God, he's going to go in and see how embarrassing my house looks and judge me, and hate me for being such a dirty, disgusting person. And that's kind of just how I felt inside. And it sucked living like that. It just really sucked. He didn't say anything. He just came out and he was like, "Love you, bro." And then he left. And I think about that a lot. I let that affect me for a long time. I didn't invite my family over. I didn't invite my friends over. I always had to go and visit them. And it was really just a bad situation to be in. And the third addiction I had was to my ex. She was I don't know how to describe her, but we were not compatible. We were both young. We met in high school, and we like to call ourselves high school sweethearts, but our relationship was toxic from the very beginning. And I kind of knew that. I knew that from very early on. And she was very manipulative and just didn't treat me the way that I felt that I deserved to be treated. But I didn't love myself enough to really say that. And that's one of the things that I kind of really struggle with even now is that I still don't really love myself. I don't really appreciate who I am, and I don't feel like I deserve good. I don't feel like I deserve to be happy, I think. And I don't know if I really want to go into a lot of detail about my ex and all of that, at least not right now, but one of my friends, my best friend, even went so far as to approach me one time, and she told me, she was like, "Hey, I just want to let you know that your relationship kind of mirrors that of a person with an addiction, the way that you guys are and the way that you are with her, and the fact that you guys have broken up several times, and the way that you act when you're away from her versus the way you are when you're with her. I just want to let you know that it's kind of like how it is when somebody who has an addiction." And I just reeled. I was so angry with her for saying that, but that like stuck in my mind and lived in my mind for a long time. And I thought about that so often after that for years. And I was with my ex for 15 years. From the time I was 15 until the time I was 30. I stayed with her because I didn't love myself enough to accept the fact that somebody else might love me. And I was scared to be alone. And so I allowed my addictive personality to latch on to the one person who, I don't know, would love me enough to stay, that I stayed in a relationship that I knew was bad for a long, long time, knowing that it was not right for me. And that's not right on either side. Whether or not she was good or bad for me, whether or not she treated me bad or not, that's not right for me to have done either. So I also really regret that. And that kind of like not feeling like I deserve to be happy and deserve the good really culminated in a bad way when I was away from my ex. I had finally broken up with her, and I'm with my new partner, and she wasn't ready to move in with me, which makes sense. We had a new relationship, and she had been on her own for a while. She had had some bad past relationships, and she really enjoyed being alone, and it was kind of a new thing for her, and I was scared of being alone. So scared that it kind of gave me panic attacks. And also I lived in a hoarded apartment, a duplex, and she basically was like, we can't, live together right now, which, I understood, but I was really scared of. And I took that time to go to therapy and try to get over my addictive traits and get rid of my hoard. And I did. I now live in a, relatively organized, unhoarded space, and I only have the stuff that I really value, and I don't keep trash, and I don't keep, excess bins. That was one of the things that I liked to hoard, was bins. I loved, things to store things in. Maybe I've got a couple of extra ones that I maybe don't need, but to the extent that I used to is comparably way, way down. And so I went through therapy and I got rid of just tons and tons of my stuff. And we finally moved in together after about a year. And when we had our first house together that we were renting, I remember I have, kind of chronic insomnia, and I would get up in the middle of the night and I would walk around in the dark, and I would have these like disassociative episodes where I felt like I was in a stranger's house, and I felt like I was sitting on my old couch with my ex watching an episode of like a different show of my new life. And I was back in that hoarded house, back in time, and nothing had happened. And I was still stuck, and I was still back in that depressed state, and back in that time when I was just really, really bad off and wanted to not exist anymore. And I remember just like I couldn't focus, and I remember sitting at my desk and like not being able to like focus on anything. And it was almost like I was high. I remember like trying to grab my mouse and not being able to find it, and opening my desk drawers, not being able to find anything. And my computer screen looked really weird. And it was just like this really weird, trippy, disassociative like episode where I think it just came on because I felt like I didn't deserve to be there, because I just didn't feel like I deserved to be happy. And I think it stems from this place of not loving who I am. I don't love myself, and I still kind of struggle with that, where I just have this hard time with feeling like I deserve anything. And so obviously that's what this is supposed to be for. I'm trying to figure out what it is that I need to unlock within myself, and stop comparing myself to others, and stop going down those dark spirals of thoughts where I feel like that. And in the last one, I talked about what would I say to my younger self who's depressed, who didn't want to exist. And I said that, it does get better, and you have to stick around long enough to get to the times when it does get better. And it did get better. And, even though I did fall back into kind of, a depressive state, and, the outlook is that, eventually I'll get back to that place of being better again. So for this, So if I had to talk to my old self who was comparing himself to other addicts, the real addicts, sitting in a circle with alcoholics and heroin addicts or whoever, saying, that's not me. I would never do any of the stuff that would make me seem like a real addict. Saying I'm not an addict. What would I say to myself to show myself that, to break through? I think I would just say, I don't know if anything that I'm going to say is really going to get through to you, but I know that you're going to ruminate on it and think about it over and over and over again, because I know that the one thing that your best friend said came up in your mind over and over again. And I know the thing that your brother said came up in your mind over and over and over again. And it took years and years and years of you thinking of that before anything really clicked. And then it took meeting Lauren for any of that to really kind of unfold in a way that meant something. Just save yourself a lot of that time and just stop comparing yourself to others. And you can learn to live in a way that you can be happy with once you learn that there are things that are holding you back. And the way that you can make yourself happy is you have to let go of the things that are holding you back. It's really hard to stop spending on things that you want and save up and pay your bills on time, because it sucks, because bills are just things that you have to pay and you don't want to because it's frustrating and feels annoying and confining and makes you feel more stuck at your job and makes you feel less free. And you have so many projects that you don't want to get rid of the stuff for. And you feel like when you give up the stuff in your hoard that's part of those projects, that you're giving up a part of yourself and you're admitting defeat and you're admitting failure by giving up that stuff and admitting that you even have a problem. But once you let go of that stuff in a healthy way, you're going to feel so much more free in a way that you won't really understand until you do it. And it's going to be scary, but you deserve to be happy. And the thing is you're not happy right now. As much as you want to try to fake and say that you are and put on a smile for everybody and lie, you can be truly happy if you just let go of all the stuff that is holding you back and just get into a place where you're safe and secure and not worried about money problems and not worried about stuff surrounding you and worried about projects that you can't finish and not worried about what you're going to do and all this other stuff. Just get rid of all that and just let in acceptance and love and stop comparing yourself to other people. That's it. I love you. You deserve everything that you want, and you can have it once you get the stuff that's holding you back out of your life. That's it, man. See you next time.